You're listening to the NABS Now podcast, brought to you by the National Association of Blind Students, a proud division of the National Federation of the Blind.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the NABS Now podcast. I'm your host Nina, and today we're going to be getting into a topic that's very important for financial independence, but unfortunately can be a little daunting for students. Today we're going to be talking all about credit cards, what they are, how to use them successfully, and some do's and don'ts to go along with it. So let's jump right in.
Hey everyone, I'm Santiago Hernandez. I'm from California, and I'm currently a college student as well, majoring in information technology management.
So we're going to jump right in. How did you first decide you wanted to get a credit card, and then how did you choose the card itself?
Honestly, I first decided I wanted to get a credit card when I started to hear about how credit was required for different things like leasing an apartment, and it could help you when you want to get a loan for something expensive. It doesn't necessarily have to be school related. Even certain jobs, apparently, they want to look at your credit, which would make sense. For instance, if you're applying at a job to help manage, financial aspects of a business, they probably would want to make sure you're good at that. So, that's definitely understandable. So, really, I decided to get a credit card when I realized, okay, maybe this is something that's going to be necessary in the future for me. So it's a good time while I have it to start working on it.
And then how did you choose the credit card that you ultimately decided to go with?
So for my first credit card, I chose that with, the bank I was already with when it came to my debit card. And I figured, okay, this is going to be my first card. This is probably going to be the one I have to get for, that's going to give me the highest chance of being approved. And so I did. But ultimately, I was wanting to look for a different option, maybe something that would be a little more convenient and efficient. And around that time, the Apple Card was coming out, and I took a look at how that worked, and it seemed very efficient, very easy to manage and keep track of. Their system works really well, and so really, when it came to that one, that's really what convinced me is how it works and things like payments and, their notification system, just overall the features they offer.
So you already kind of talked about why credit's important for a student. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. What would you tell students who maybe have grown up or have this idea kind of ingrained in them that credit cards are bad and that you should stay away from credit cards?
Yeah, definitely. So honestly, credit cards are not a bad thing. Really, it comes down to being responsible with them. Of course, maybe someone who either hasn't put much effort into managing their financial situation and spends a lot, of course, they might not necessarily like it because, of course, you do have to pay credit and interest. You have to pay interest in if you don't pay off your credit card because you're going to be in debt. But if you're in a situation where you don't spend more than you can afford most of the time, and if you pay it off in time, then really all it does is builds up your credit, and the credit is what is going to be necessary when you apply for things like to rent an apartment, or even later on, years from now, buy a home. Those are all going to be good things, or it's going to look good really on your application to do that.
How did you learn to use your credit card in a smart way?
I learned to use my credit card in a smart way by honestly, doing quite a bit of research online. It's honestly what I ended up doing. I had a lot of questions like, okay, how much am I supposed to spend? How can I build my credit at a fast pace? I just had various questions, and I looked at different articles, different videos. I asked around because I had friends who already had some experience with credit cards, and I asked them, okay, what do you do? How do you use your card in terms of making your credit score go up quicker? And so just a combination of all of that really is what got me where I am today when it comes to that.
Can you explain how to build good credit? I know you've researched it a lot, and you're actually the friend that helped me learn how to use my credit cards. So
Yeah, no, definitely.
I think you can help
Uh,
a lot of people.
yeah, so really, probably the best way to explain it is kind of to do it with, like a scenario or like say I have, I guess we could use something like an Apple Card, for instance. All right, so let's say, okay, I just got the new card. We could say it's the beginning of the month, right? And I'm spending, I'm using it, and they gave me a credit line of, let's just say, $1,000. And I'm trying to raise my credit as fast as possible. So, really, in this case, the best thing to do is to not spend more than 9% of your credit line. And that's really how you get it up as fast as possible. So, in
So
this
that'd be
case,
$90 then.
what was that?
That'd be $90 then.
Yeah, in this case, it would be $90. So, really, no matter what you do, don't go above $90 if you want to raise it as fast as possible. Now, sometimes, I mean, it happens. You spend more, you have to spend more, or you forget to pay off some of your credit card. And you should still be fine, really, as long as you stay between 9% and 17%.
So between 90 and 170 for a credit line of $1,000.
Right. And okay, let's say you're in a situation where maybe you have to spend some more. Really, your best bet would be to not spend over 30%. So,
Ever?
don't go over the 300. Because at that point, you do risk your credit score falling. Maybe not by much, in the first month, but if it happens the second or third, you'll definitely notice a decrease.
Okay, so 9% is ideal for raising your credit score as fast as possible. And 17% is kind of like average, and then you shouldn't really go over 30% ever.
Right. Yeah, the 30% is, that's the point where you really should not pass at all.
And just for
Um,
everyone listening, to do the easy math version, you can just multiply your percents as decimals. So like 0.09
right.
times whatever your credit line is, 0.17, etc. So that's a very helpful tip. So when should you pay off your credit card? Like, should I put something on there and pay it off the same day, or how does that work?
Actually, it depends. And here's something that I like to do. So on my credit card, me personally, and this is something that really it depends on everyone's situation, because some people might find this being, a pain, kind of paying it off multiple times a month like this. But let's say, for example, you're looking at your credit card and you have a balance of $300. You reach that 30%. Well, something you could do is pay some of that off until it goes back down to 9%. And really what gets reported to the credit bureaus, which, those are the companies that really are in charge of your credit score, is your final balance right before the end of the month, right before your statement. It's a little different for some cards, but basically, you'll know when you'll receive that month's statement, and whatever your balance is right before you normally get that statement is what gets reported. So in reality, you could spend that 30%, and you could spend that 30%, and you could pay some of it off and lower it back down to 9%, as long as, of course, you keep track of that. But honestly, that is something that for some, I could see why it would be a little more stressful to keep track of and all that. In that situation, then, just making sure you don't go above that 30% in worst cases is the best thing to do.
There's usually due dates on your statements too. So I know
Mm-hmm.
personally for me, I pay mine off the first of the month because
That's what I do too.
it's one of
Yeah.
it's just like, I have a few things I have to do on the first of the month every month, and like that's just one of them, and I just know that. But like
That's also what I do.
my statement's not due till
Because it's
12th.
easier to do it that way, really.
Yeah.
Right.
But what's interesting is like my statement's not technically due till the 12th, but that doesn't mean you can't pay it off before then. It just means like you don't want to pay it off as soon as you use it. I also caution our students to not get tripped up by the minimum payment due. Because a lot
Exactly.
of times that'll say $0 if you haven't been spending a lot on your credit card because you're not maxing out your credit. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't pay it off. It just means that you won't be in trouble if you don't pay it off, but you're going to accumulate interest. So
Right.
we have a discussion in the first part of this podcast about terminology for credit cards and like what good credit scores are and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind when you are reading. A lot of times it will say balance due like $0 because technically they want you to accumulate the interest. You know what I mean?
Right. It really benefits them if you don't pay it off completely because, they'll charge you interest. And,
So
that
make money.
interest, right. And if it's one of your first barely starting to bill off your credit, that interest rate is honestly going to be on the higher side. So you really don't want to get into that if at all possible, because not only will you have to pay interest, but that's also going to reflect on your credit report. And so when you try to, even something, for instance, like applying for certain cell phone plans or to get a phone and pay it off over 2 years, they're going to see that you're obviously in debt. And so that's really going to have an effect on whether they approve or deny your application.
Well, thank you so much for being on with us. I think we all really appreciate a student perspective. And I think your numbers are going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you. No problem.
Hi, my name is Janae. I was on the NABS board in 2018, 2019. That area, I did a lot of this type of stuff too, getting the podcast off the ground. I was on outreach. I was on fundraising. So I was kind of in your guys' shoes doing a lot of that just a couple of years ago while I was in grad school. I have probably about 10 years now in financial education and just working in finance in general. I think with a lot of people, you just kind of stumble into that career. No one is ever like, I want to be an accountant when I grow up or anything like that. But I worked for Wells Fargo for 4 or 5 years doing credit card billing disputes and doing financing, not ever specifically credit cards like you guys would probably think of credit cards. But before that, I did credit card counseling for low-income families and helped them with housing and helped them with credit and did financial education classes. Now I work at Iowa State doing grants and helping basically risk management, babysitting faculty, making sure they don't spend buy dumb things on grants that use federal funding.
That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you're here with us today. You obviously have a wealth of experience. And I love that, babysitting faculty. So how we're going to start out is Janae is actually just going to define some terms for us today, because if anyone has looked at a credit card or even gone through the process of applying, there are a lot of terms and fine print that look a little scary, but they're usually not too bad. So we're just going to kind of go down the list. And I'll just kind of say the term if you want to just explain it. So credit line.
The credit line is going to be the amount that a bank or a credit union gives you to spend. So that would be, if you're just starting out and, you don't have that good of credit, you don't have a lot of credit, you apply for maybe a store credit card, they'd give you, $200 or $300. That's not super common. Usually you're getting a little bit more than that. But as you build your credit, you can raise your credit limit. So that credit line, if you would like to buy more, more things in a given month or in a given time period, you can raise that amount. And, that's a fine balance between what you and your choices and what you would like to do. I have a pretty high credit card limit at this point because I'm pretty comfortable with the amount I spend. But if you're just starting out, you might not want to give yourself that opportunity to spend a lot of money and have that credit. So you can also always ask, I don't think a lot of people realize this, but that credit limit, that amount that you have to spend, you can also have it lowered if you'd rather not have that line of credit out there.
That doesn't hurt your credit score to do that. So basically, it might hurt it a tiny bit, but if you're doing what you're supposed to, other things are going to override that.
Exactly.
So if it's going to help you develop safe habits for spending, then it's
great. It also can hurt your credit if you have a lot of unused credit out there. So a lot of people think it's a good idea just to open credit cards and not use them, but then you've got all these available credit lines and banks kind of look at that if they're giving you credit. If they want to be nitpicky, a lot of times they don't. But if they want to look at that and say, well, wow, she's got $20,000 out here in unused credit, that could be used by tomorrow. We don't really know why why they're letting that amount sit out there and they're not using their credit. So it would go, what I would say, against or for your credit utilization, which is the percentage of your credit line that you're using. You want to keep that number below 40-ish%. So if you have a credit card that only has $200 on it and you're using that $200, that's not a lot of money for someone to just use for their bills in a month, but that's, as a percentage, you're using 100% of your credit line. And that's what would go against your credit score. So the best practice is to keep your credit line at, if you're going to spend the $200, keep your credit line, that open balance, at 600. If you think you're going to spend more like 300, keep your credit line at 900. So it's kind of that general rule, or a third to about 40% is where you want to keep that balance. But at the end of the day, again, that has a very low impact on your credit score, but it can make a difference if you're just starting out.
Okay, so our next I'm going to say the group of terms that go together a little bit. So interest and fixed interest.
I mean, fixed interest is not important. That's a term that you would use in 8th grade to make your life hell and to make math problems, basically. There's not a whole lot of people a lot of times don't understand what that would be. So, if fixed interest is the idea that if you take out a $100 loan at a 5% interest rate, you're going to pay that $5. And it seems very simple, but that's not really how the world works in practicality. But that's, again, that's how your 8th grade math teacher would ask. And that's why a lot of people are in debt right now, is because they're using their experience from very poor financial education to make their financial decisions. So that's another soapbox I'll get onto later. What you really want to pay attention to is the APR, or the interest rate. For basic purposes, there's not a whole lot of difference for what you guys would need to know. Your APR is the annual percentage rate, and that's just taking the interest plus any fees that are associated with a credit card. It matters more with like a car loan or a house loan, because there's a lot of different things, moving parts in those kind of loans. But with a credit card, that APR, that interest rate, is just your interest divided over a year. So good interest rate would be 11%. Maybe you could probably get something lower, but that's just taking anything that you don't pay off in a month, putting 11% interest divided over 12 months. We can say 12% interest then, to make this a little easier. But then you're paying 1% interest on whatever you leave on your credit card.
That's really interesting. I've even taken like a class or two on credit cards, like in school when I was younger, and they don't explain that the APR is divided over the 12 months. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize.
They sure don't. I think I worked at Wells Fargo for
I didn't
2
know
years
that
before I even figured that out, because the way our loans work, when I did work at Wells Fargo, it was more financing. So I didn't really pay attention to how that worked until one time I got hard up for money and I didn't pay off my credit card, like my full balance. Like, I had spent my whole, young adult career until I was 23 or 24, diligently every single month paying off that full balance. I was just terrified of, going into debt or becoming that person. And then I called in and I was like, I just want to know, I don't understand, like, how bad is it going to be? And she's like, this is like 50 cents. I will give you 50 cents. Just get off the phone with me. And that's not to say not to be careful, because if you're buying a big purchase, like if you decide you want to spend $15,000 on stuff, that can spiral out of control really fast if you're someone who doesn't have the education, or if you don't feel like you have that self-control. That's something that we all have to be that little bit aware of, and just know where our financial goals are. And if you're leaving a revolving balance, so if you're leaving just a little bit on your credit card each month without paying it off, it's not that big a deal. But it's when you just kind of forget that it's there and just start paying the minimum payments.
Which is what I was going to ask you to define next. A lot of people, sorry not to cut you off, but I know I've heard from a lot of students when we talked about doing a podcast on credit cards, we got to talk about credit cards a little bit. People were like, well, I spent, $100, but it says my payment's $0. my minimum payment is 0, so I don't have to pay anything. And I'm like, no. So
I mean,
it's
unlikely that the minimum payment is going to be a certain percentage of your balance that the bank decides you owe them that you need to pay by the next statement due date. So if you've got, for example, if your minimum payment says 0, that typically means you've already made a payment to them in that payment cycle. And, if you're trying to keep a pattern, not to make a payment again until, the next month at that certain date. We did have to do, when I did work billing disputes, a lot of corrections because someone would pay their bill on the 1st and then they'd pay their bill on the 29th, or probably not the 29th, more like the 23rd or something, thinking it would go to the next month. But that payment just went to their principal, and now they have a late fee for the next month because they made their last payment too early, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But
it makes sense to pay attention to the date when it says payment due by whatever.
Yeah. So the best practice, if you don't have a lot of money to spare and, you want to keep that simple and balanced, is to pay on the same day of every month so that doesn't happen, so that you don't accidentally, because they can't, usually they're nice and they'll fix it for you, but it is, it's going to probably cost you a phone call and a little bit of stress, not knowing if they'll approve it. And so, it's best to just try and pay it the same day every month, unless, of course, you're trying to pay down your principal or your previous balance that you had on the card.
Do you want to explain a little bit about, basically brief, what is a credit score and what numerically is a good versus bad credit score?
Yeah. So a credit score is just a number based on what the 3 credit reporting agencies know about you and all your dirty secrets. Usually they're pretty much the same. So it's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Everyone kind of heard about the big Experian hack or whatever that happened a couple of years ago. Some people got money, but that's one of the 3 credit reporting agencies. And you can understand why that would be scary, because they've got access to all of your personal information, your social security number. So your credit score is going to be, I think 800 is the highest. I don't think it's possible to have a credit score of 0. I've never seen it. Usually a really, really bad low credit score is like 200. They give you, a couple free points so you feel good about yourself if you're feeling real sad, I guess. Typically anything above 680 or 700 is going to be fine. Anything below, there's kind of a list and best practices if you get a Credit Karma account and really look into it, or you contact the credit scores. But based on kind of what I know from working with underwriters, I would say you're probably not going to get a credit card if your score is below 580 to 600. If you do get a loan or a credit card, you're going to be paying pretty high interest rate at that point. But sometimes, you got to get started somewhere, and you just got to have diligence and pay off your loan every month or whatever you have open to build your credit.
You brought up that you can't have a credit score of 0. It does take several months, depending on how much credit you have open and all kinds of stuff, to get a credit score. So I know for me, I opened a credit card and it took probably about 6-ish months or whatever to even have a credit score to begin with. And so you won't have a credit score of 0, but it might say not enough information to calculate credit score. There's not enough accounts open.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean go open another credit card. It just means to keep doing what you're doing, because it takes a little while for them to be able to get a wide enough picture. And really briefly, I was wondering if you could just super briefly touch on what other things actually go into your credit score, if you know any utilities and things like that. Because this is all about credit cards, but there are other things that might be why you might have a credit score.
Yeah, it's kind of all encompassing. And with that not enough credit thing, that when I did credit, I worked with Dillard's credit card, so store credit card, working with a lot of young people that were trying to, I don't know if anyone here has ever worked retail, but a big push at Sears and Dillard's and those department stores is to get people to apply for their credit cards. And
every time you check out.
Yep, every time. And I had to do it when I worked at Sears, and I know how frustrating it is, but there'd just be people that a lot of the employees too would apply, and they just wouldn't have enough credit. And you can call and ask them to manually relook at it if you really want to try and build your credit and get that. You can also call, if you're trying to build your credit, you can call your cell phone company or your utility company and ask them to report your bill to to the credit agencies, because the tough thing about your credit score is it doesn't care if you're paying your rent on time. It doesn't care if you're paying all of your bills on time. That stuff typically doesn't get reported. So you can ask if you're really trying to build your credit to get that. You can call your bank if you're having trouble getting approved, because I know I had this problem and I had to actually go into a bank, to my bank, and talk to my banker because they kept advertising that they had this credit card, and I'd apply every time and I'd get declined. I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? I don't know. So I think eventually, to get my first credit card, I had to go in, talk to my banker, and put on the sweet talk. I don't remember what I said, but I finally got like that glorious $200 or $300 balance on a student credit card that they got just through my bank. So sometimes it's just going to take a little finagling to get that first step done. And if you don't want credit, I think there's a big push just to get credit and to get kids credit cards, because it's, you're not going to survive in life without credit. That's not really true. Like if you don't want to buy a house in the next 10 years, if you don't want to buy a car, I'm talking to a blind audience, so don't go buying cars, driving them around. I mean, if you want to buy a car for your partner or whatever to build your credit, you can. But, if that's not part of your financial goals, if you're in a big city where it's more common to just rent forever, use your debit card. You don't have to have credit to live. If you don't feel comfortable having getting a loan every month from a bank, just don't. It's not that big a deal if you don't have credit. So the thing that's going to have the biggest impact on your credit score is your payment history. If you've got, anything in collections, or if you've got any late payments that they record, whatever it is, your credit card, your mortgage, whatever you've got out there, that payment history accounts for a third of whatever your credit score is. And then the next thing is going to be your total debt. I don't think medical bills count. I think that's the one exclusion. But if you've got a really high debt to income ratio, so the amount of debt you have is high within relation to your annual salary, your income, that's going to have a negative effect. And so that total debt that you have, student loans and whatever credit card debt you have, that's about 30% of your total credit score. And then the next thing is also going to be a problem is the length of your credit history has a 15% impact. So just by not being an old person, you're at a disadvantage. So sorry. You just have, and I can't remember, it took me a long time because I also didn't know. I thought, and then I got that one credit card, like I was saying before, and I thought I just had to pay that credit card on time every month to keep my credit score up. And then I finally learned how it worked. And I think my credit score was still like 650. And I think I'd had that credit card for 5 years or so. And it was okay. And if I probably wanted a loan or something, I might have been able to get one at a poor interest rate, but it still wasn't great. So credit history does matter that little bit, and every little bit will count. The next thing is your new credit history. So if they see that you're getting more loans quickly, or if they see that you have a lot of hits on your credit. So you hear a lot of companies talk about a soft hit on your credit. That's BS. It's not real. There's no such thing as a soft hit on your credit. I don't know how many times I've had to explain this to angry people. That's a salesperson thing that they will say because they don't know anything about credit and they want you to buy a car. So that amount of hits to your credit does matter. You want to have ideally 0, but 1 or 2 isn't going to be that big a deal. Again, this is only about 12% of what matters. And then the last thing that goes into your credit score is about 10% is the type of credit. So it looks good if you've got, a couple credit cards and a home loan and maybe a tiny, tiny student loan. I think this is kind of weird because having a bunch of different types of credit seems like a bad thing that you wouldn't want to do. Like you wouldn't want to have a bunch of credit cards open, but it actually looks good to the credit reporting agencies. If you've got 4 or 5 credit cards that you're managing and you've got a home loan and a car loan and whatever other kind of credit that I'm not thinking of, it looks good to them if they see that you can manage all these different types of accounts and still pay them on time. And that's about it. That's what goes into your credit. I would recommend, it's totally free to sign up for a Credit Karma account. I think it's just credit, CREDIT, Karma, KARMA, creditkarma.com. That will give you, I think, 2 of the 3 reporting agencies now, and it's pretty accurate. I would say it inflates a little bit as to what the bank is going to see. I don't know why, that's just my experience, but it gives you a really good example of what your credit, what everything means. I'm not sure. Do you know how accessible that is? I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but I'm sure that other people can comment on it.
So
you just use.
Yeah, because I'm still pretty new, so I'll just use Experian, which has been okay.
Yeah, you can get a free credit report from all 3 credit agencies once a year. So all you have to do is call them, tell them to send you a report, and that should be enough. If you really, really want to be on top of it, you can set a reminder every, 4 months to call one of the credit reporting agencies and have a pretty good idea to do it that way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them you can check online now too, and you don't have to call. So it's kind of just figuring out what works for you, and it's most of it seems to be accessible desktop wise though.
So the last thing I kind of wanted to talk to is credit card fraud, especially if you're young people and old people tend to get preyed on a lot because identity thieves, predators know that you're not checking your credit, you're not responsible, you're not going to notice if they steal your social security number. One way to prevent that is to opt out of credit card ads. So if you get credit card offers in the mail and you live in an apartment building or somewhere that that stuff's not locked, someone can take that and just fill it out in your name and have that information that's in there. So I always recommend to people to opt out of any of those kind of things so that you don't have that. I think the phone number for that is just 1-800-OPT-OUT. And you can also find, I think it's probably online somewhere, that you can opt out of all of those credit cards. And it saves trees too. You don't want to murder all the trees just so that Chase can get an extra buck. The other thing that I would say, if you're not planning on using your credit for a while, or if you're someone who decides credit isn't for me, I don't ever want to use it, you can call the credit agencies. And I think if you call one of them, they will do it for all 3 and they'll send the information on to the other 2. But you can put a fraud alert. You can either do an extended fraud alert or a 90-day fraud alert, so that if anyone tries to apply in your name, they're not going to be able to. And that's, there's all this identity theft companies out there that'll send you your credit score and do all this, but if you just make a couple phone calls, you can do all that yourself for free. And just that way, if you lock your credit or if you put a fraud alert out there, then that really minimizes your risk. And if you do want to apply for something, you can just go ahead and take that off of there. But I recommend that everyone have some kind of fraud alert on their credit, so that it's really easy to find someone's social security number and their birth. A lot of people put their birthday on Facebook, and that's considered private information. And it's really easy to just get that information and apply for a credit card in someone else's name. There's not a lot of technology that's been used to kind of move that forward so that those kind of things aren't happening. So I would say just, you're going to be busy while you're in college. Protect yourself so it's one less thing for you to worry about.
Thank you so much to Janae and Santiago for all the insights and knowledge they had to share. And I know it definitely helped me figure out how to better use my credit card, and I hope that y'all experience the same. So we'll talk to you on our next episode.